Looks like you're good.
All right. Okay. Live streaming, live recording. Get some people filtering in. Chad, how you doing?
Doing well. How are you, Justin?
I'm good, thank you. Let's see. I'm just going to get my angle a little bit so I can get more of the globe. Nah. You have a much better background than I do.
Sometimes my dog's back there.
That's perfect. Where's the puppy?
Yeah, she would interrupt us for sure.
That's why I brought mine to daycare today, so she wouldn't get involved. All right, let's see. We got some people filtering in. We're going to let them kind of filter in as we start talking. And let's get this started because we are live streaming on Facebook. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. My name is Justin Isaac with the Lawyer in Blue Jeans Group. I am joined today by a very special guest who I've actually known all my life. And he's going to give us some insight into San Diego's political scene as well as some of the ballot measures. And so if you have any questions, we'll do our best to answer them, or he'll do his best to answer them. There might be some things that we might not be able to get to. It might be for another webinar. But I wanted Chad to come on, and he's been on our show in the past too, to give us a little bit of a better insight as to the San Diego political scene than you would see in the news. It tends to be a bit verbose and sometimes misleading, in my opinion. So I wanted to bring Chad on to discuss. So Chad, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Why don't you go ahead and explain like your credentials and what you do, if you could.
Oh, I have credentials. Well, I went to USD Law School, so technically I'm an attorney. I spend most of my, the primary job. I run a digital media firm. We specialize in what I call nonpartisan digital communications. What that means is we're not a Democrat firm. We're not a Republican firm. We work for candidates, causes, organizations. Some clients aren't political at all, in executing communications projects. And most simply, I think we have a fundamental approach that's different than most others in politics. Some of you may have heard what they call the divide and conquer strategy. Essentially, figure out what people are going to believe, what people believe, tell them that you're the one that believes it, and then push them out to the polls or push them to do whatever you want to do. Our approach is grounded in, educating voters. And so if you have a position is telling voters why they should be supporting you or your cause or whatever it is. So we've grown from, I'd say we had 5 or 6 of us about 10 years ago. And now we have, I think 17 or 18 here in San Diego, another 9 in Mexico in our office in Tijuana, doing a variety of projects and campaigns.
Nice. And so one of your focuses is, if I can speak for you a little bit, is to kind of remove yourself from the duopoly mindset, would you say?
Well, my work really with the Independent Voter Project in particular was author of California's top 2 nonpartisan primary. I happened to do that campaign in the tail end of my law school career. And so took some related classes in democracy and really tried to look more deeper at the election process itself. So most simply, for those of you who are familiar with California's top 2 nonpartisan primary, the political world looks at it one way. Does this help Democrats or does this help Republicans, right? If you step back and think about most fundamentally what it did, it fundamentally changed the primary election system in California from one where legally and in reality, it's a primary election to serve the private interest of each of the 2 political parties. Well, with nearly a third of the electorate now registering no party preference, one of the rationales for having a top 2 nonpartisan primary, like we do at the municipal level, like we have here in San Diego, is that the purpose of the primary itself isn't to elect somebody to represent a party. It's to narrow the candidate field for all the voters, hence the nonpartisan nature. So it was from that experience that I kind of got involved in the reform community, which 10 years ago was a handful of people arguing about wonky stuff in the corner of a room. Now, I've had an opportunity to work on ranked choice voting efforts in Maine, opening primaries in Colorado, I filed 2 amicus briefs in an ongoing lawsuit that started 4 years ago with the Commission on Presidential Debates. So really what it all, when you reference the term duopoly, it's really, that can be mistaken as we're working on things that are anti-party or against the Republican Party and against the Democratic Party, which is not really the case. I think the folks that work in the reform space, by and large, believe that just like in the economy, if you had Taco Bell and McDonald's had a monopoly, and they were the only 2 fast food restaurants you got to go to, probably McDonald's and Taco Bell wouldn't come out with new food and be healthier and try to compete with all the other fast food restaurants. The same theory in politics is what we're suggesting, is that we have a duopoly, and that the Republican and Democratic Party have almost exclusive control over the election process. And so that they're not really accountable to the larger electorate. And, for those of you who are concerned about the level of partisanship that's going on, things like the top 2 nonpartisan primary and the debates commission and ranked choice voting, these are all things related to how do we create a competition, which in our argument isn't anti-party. In fact, if you take it to its logical conclusion, that it would actually strengthen parties, because parties would have to be responsive to more people to win, and therefore they'd have more voter support.
So essentially, we're looking to include more people who are otherwise excluded by the way of they don't have the preference of either party necessarily, or they don't prefer either party, but they're not really included because there's certain things that the Democrats or Republicans have put in place to maintain their control.
Absolutely right. And I can give you one real quick example.
Sure.
Take New Jersey. New Jersey is a state where you have 47% of the electorate is registered as independent.
Wow.
Now, because they have closed primaries, now both parties have agreed to close their primaries by law.
What does that mean?
That means that by law, you can only vote in a primary. Remember, they're partisan, not like California's nonpartisan. You have a closed Republican and a closed Democrat. That means if you're an independent voter, by law, you're not allowed to participate. So one of the lawsuits we filed, which, this is a long case, it's not going to be decided overnight, is making the simple argument: you have taxpayers funding an important stage of the election process, and by law, half the voters can't participate because they've exercised their right not to join a party. Mm-hmm. So what's the consequence on accountability? Well, if you take New Jersey's gerrymandering, for example, the reality is in 2018, there wasn't a single statewide race in New Jersey that was decided by a factor of less than 10%. So what does that mean? That means if you got elected in the primary, there really wasn't a competition in November to win. The candidate was pretty much decided in the primary. So our argument is, okay, well then what about those 50% of voters who were precluded by law from participating in the primary, which was really the only meaningful stage of the election, right? So that's how we connect the way we conduct elections to the divisive partisanship that we see, because at the end of the day, it's really a handful of voters selecting nominees, in this case, New Jersey, right? Now there's a whole body of laws and rules, and the debate commission factors into it, of how both parties have kind of worked together to, well, they may fight amongst each other, but somebody else wants to go sit at the poker table, they'll both gang up and kick you off. Yeah. So, we think that the parties themselves suffer from that approach, and most importantly, our democracy suffers.
And I think the majority of people would probably agree with you, whether you are the, most fervent Republican or Democrat. I think that a lot of people who tend to follow these parties are a little bit more moderate than they're painted out to be in the news, in my opinion. After watching the debate between Trump and Biden, I tell you, Twitter was. I saw it. I can't count how many times I saw people say, "This is the best that we can offer," and it's not because there's other people, but it is because those other people are excluded by the debate commission. So, can you kind of talk about that briefly, about what has happened and why we only see 2 people on a debate, whereas in other countries, in the European Union, a lot of other countries will have like 6 parties, 7 parties. Parties go in power, out of power all the time, yet we have 2. So if you could explain that a little bit.
Well, the last real credible, third party challenge, if you'll recall, was Ross Perot when he ran in the Reform Party ticket. And then after that election, you had both sides blaming each other and arguing about whose votes he took more. But really, since that time, Ralph Nader tried to get onto the presidential debate stage, but something that voters may not be aware of, most people, is that it was, about 30 years ago, a little over 30 years ago, the League of Women Voters used to be like the moderator in charge of the rules and right. And it was the credibility of the League of Women Voters that hosted this most important conversation political conversation that the American people have, right, every 4 years. They actually withdrew their participation about 30 something years ago. And this is their words, not mine, is that their continued participation would perpetuate a fraud on the American people. And so they withdrew participation.
Okay.
When they talk about the Commission on Presidential Debates, it kind of has most people probably think, oh, that's some agency or nonprofit service. What it actually is 6 board members, 3 of them appointed by the Democratic Party, 3 of them appointed by the Republican Party, to determine the rules, including how you get into the presidential debates. So a lawsuit that was filed by a group called Level the Playing Field about 4 or 5 years ago. And remember, this is a tough process. You talk about the institutional barriers. Because it's governed by the FCC, which is an administrative agency, they have to first file an administrative court, exhaust all that, which, the administration is going to rubber stamp it, then go into federal court, then go, right? So there's just been this back and forth and trying to get the point. But the point is, one challenge they're making is, this is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, which means it's tax deductible. It's funded by corporations like Coca-Cola, right? They're saying, well, this is not a nonpartisan organization. It's a bipartisan organization, which is fundamentally different, right? A nonpartisan organization is like agnosticism, right? Bipartisan is just saying, hey, I chose 2 teams. Yeah. So that's one cause of action. And the other major cause of action is that we have what's called the 15% rule. That's how you get qualified to be on the presidential debate stage. And basically their argument is this 15% rule is not objective. It's a rule that was deliberately designed to beat a threshold that nobody outside the two parties can actually get to. And it's a way to insulate the 2 parties from anybody outside the 2 parties from being a part of that debate.
Mm-hmm. And that's the barrier used to be a lot lower, though. Didn't it used to be 5%?
It was lower. I recall what it was when Ross Perot got in. But what's important to note is Ross Perot was not polling that high when he first got into the debate. So he wouldn't have qualified under these new rules.
Yeah.
So that's one of the arguments obviously being made in the complaint.
Yeah. And I think that if you follow, well, I go on Twitter just for the news and just to kind of see what people are saying. I don't think I've ever tweeted before. But it's interesting to see, people suggesting like the Libertarian candidate and Gary Johnson last time, people were trying to get him on stage as well. I think they're running a better candidate now because she's polling pretty decently, Jo Jorgensen, right? Yeah. And she seems to be doing pretty well as well. But one thing I think we're getting to, though, is we're getting to this realization by so many millions of people that they don't want to subscribe to a party because it doesn't best suit them. They want to be able to kind of pick and choose at their discretion, and that's how you, in my opinion, you should be. You shouldn't be blindly with just some group or organization. You should, be thinking like, do I like this or do I like that? But it does limit you if you have 2 parties in control that you can't really go against because they've stacked the deck. I'm interested to see where that Level the Playing Field lawsuit goes because I remember learning that in constitutional law, that you have to go through all these administrative barriers. And so it is a very, very lengthy process to eventually, get there. And I know you had some similar roadblocks in your New Jersey lawsuit, correct? Where it was.
We filed writ all the way to the Supreme Court in the New Jersey case. So theoretically, they could decide to hear it tomorrow. And, we know the reality is just like in the gay marriage cases, that was decades before the Supreme Court took that up. So we're at the very beginning. We called that case from the beginning. It's our issue setting case. We're in the midst of a case right now in California on the same basic issue. And really at the end of the day, our argument is focused on the right of association, the right of equal protection as it relates to primary elections. They're taxpayer funded, publicly administered stages of the election process. Nobody denies that they are an important stage of the election process. And our argument is very simple. And we hope one day the Supreme Court hears it and makes a decision. Is it a violation of our fundamental right to not associate with a private organization? Is it a violation of our fundamental right of equal protection, to not be able to vote in an election, but if you register Republican or Democrat, you can, and it is, so are states allowed to discriminate, violate those fundamental rights in order to conduct an election? We believe the ultimate answer, if it gets to the Supreme Court, is no.
Yeah.
The voter needs to be treated as a voter, not as a member or a non-member of a party.
And I believe this is a similar argument for, cases against gerrymandering too, because it is a discrimination, or it doesn't have it might be not intentional discrimination, but it has a discriminatory effect, correct?
Correct. It's a little bit different issue, and
true.
Most of the gerrymandering cases, and the reason why you have more money behind them and stuff is because there are partisan interests involved. Is most of the gerrymandering cases are argued up here, right? This is an unfair competition between the Republicans and the Democrats, right?
Yeah.
Really, the issue we're bringing is down here. It's more fundamental. It's saying our elections are not competitions between the Republican and Democratic Party. Sure, they're competitors, but they're ultimately a competition between people who want to be representatives and all voters, regardless of what party they are, right? So gerrymandering is a very important issue. It has, I think it is being taken more seriously in the courtrooms and in the press, but there are more fundamental issues that most people probably aren't aware of, which contribute directly to the type of politics we see that incentivizes candidates and representatives to appeal to a smaller and smaller base of voters.
Mm-hmm. And so you're not only fighting your way through the courts, but you're fighting your way against these huge organizations that have just money for days, and they can spend as much as they want.
And they've nominated all the judges.
Yeah. Which is, the deck is definitely stacked against you, but I have a feeling that the country feels like it's moving towards something. And again, a lot of people don't like the options that we have, thinking that these are the only two options, and they're definitely not. It's just those are the ones that are being presented to us. So people are a little fed up, it seems, and maybe these cases are going to start to gain some traction. And hopefully be decided for the people and not for the organization or for the corporation.
We'll see. I have a sense of optimism, as I mentioned before. It was a few group of people arguing in a corner. The space of quote unquote reformers has exploded. Still relatively small if you want to compare it to the partisan interests, but it's growing. There's folks coming in from both sides of the aisle that are understanding this is not an ideological battle.
Yeah.
And I think, it's a matter of time. So once enough people, kind of see, and even in the parties realize, look, I can't even survive in my own party if we don't have some kind of reform. I think, kind of opens the door for something real to happen.
For some change. Real quick before we pivot to San Diego politics, what would the opposition say against what your filings would be? What is their main objection to that?
The opposition here is the Secretary of State. Alex Padilla he's a Democrat, Secretary of State. They do talk a lot about voting rights, but I shit you not, you read the papers, their argument is primary elections are for the political parties.
Yeah.
And they serve the political parties, and they're just doing what they're told. And that, if you don't want to join or register with the party, then too bad.
Yeah.
Simply join a party.
Yeah.
Everybody has the right to join a party.
Which is not it just seems like a status quo argument as opposed to being able to actually defend the position.
Well, I personally find it ironic for a state that talks about reducing barriers to participation, that anything put in the way between a voter and the ballot box is an anathema to democracy, but somehow, forcing somebody to associate with an organization they don't agree with is not. I use the analogy that say, we all agree you have a fundamental right to religion. We'd find it absurd if you said, well, yeah, you have a fundamental right as long as you go to a synagogue or a Catholic church. Right?
Yeah.
We'd find that absurd.
Yeah.
But that's exactly the arguments that they're making right now in court, saying, yeah, you have the right to political speech and the right to vote as a citizen, as long as you join one of the two major parties.
Yeah. And obviously, I think a lot of people would disagree or think that that's not right. So, all right, let's move on to San Diego politics. Now, there's a lot going on here. We have a pretty interesting mayoral race, and I'm seeing a lot all over social media as well too. It's funny how social media has just changed, and it's how we get our news. Facebook, Twitter. Have you seen The Social Dilemma on Netflix?
I have. I watched it a few weeks ago.
What'd you think?
Yeah, it's interesting, scary, all that stuff.
So we talked a little bit earlier. What about local elections? Is the way we vote here ideal, or is there reform needed as well?
Well, it's better here than it is in many places. Like I said, we've had nonpartisan elections for a long time here in California, in San Diego. Mm-hmm. This year's interesting because we have a lot of Dem on Dem races, including the race for mayor, because the two Democrats ended up in first and second. I worked with a number of organizations, including League of Women Voters, Take Back Our Republic, a more conservative organization, lots of more left-leaning organizations. We have Represent Us, and a pretty broad coalition that filed an initiative with City Council. We got through the Rules Committee, and then we lost by one vote on the full council, which would have increased the candidate field from 2 to 4. So if you put that into context of the mayor's race, instead of it just being Barbara Bree and Todd Gloria, it would have been Barbara Bree, Todd Gloria, Scott Sherman, and Tasha Williamson. Mm-hmm. So you would have had a lot more diverse choices. And then you say, okay, well, how do you have 4 candidates? Somebody could win with 25%. We had a mechanism called ranked choice voting, which would allow you to say, this is my first choice, this is my second, my third. And then, so when you vote on your candidates, if no candidate gets a majority on the first round, you drop off the last, and then you recount the votes that way to ensure a majority win. So it gives voters more options, has more voices in the race. That is a reform that's kind of taken hold in the reform community in order to give voters more choice and increase competition. There's certainly a lot of other ways. That group, we're still meeting monthly. Fully anticipate having a reform package for their next election cycle. But it really was spectacular, even how far we got. I remember when we said we were going to propose this to City Council, we kind of got laughed at and said, good luck, Yeah. I don't know if you heard the phrase, committees are where good bills go to die.
Yes.
Nobody expected us to get out of committee. And what you have to give a big round of applause to, assuming you support such a reform, to Monica Montgomery, because she was the third swing vote on the council, and voted in favor to move it to the full council, despite the overwhelming objections from her own party's operatives, as well as some of the larger special interests who do not want to have more competition in the election process.
So ranked choice voting, let me ask you about this, because I find this to be a very interesting idea, concept. If you don't have a majority, then or is there a tally of votes? So like, say you have 3 people, right? And I put John, Frank, and Bill first, 1, 2, 3. So by me putting him first, does he get assigned like 3 points and then 2 points for the second place, 1 point for the third, and then you add up points, or how does that ranked choice work?
It's a very good question. So I'll take it a couple steps. The first, I'll say, I'm not of the view that ranked choice voting solves the world's problems. Okay. I'm not of the view that there's no unintended consequences, right? I go of the view that election systems, by and large, you have a game. I don't use it in pejoratively, but game theory is that you have to think about how are the operatives going to try to manipulate the election into their favor, right? And that if you take what we have today and you move to a top 4 style system, the game would be more difficult for the operatives to rig against the voters, right? So directly to your counting question, what we were submitted what is the methodology that has been embraced largely throughout the country and has already been implemented in places like Maine and New Mexico and a number of other cities where you do rounds of voting, and then the last place, if nobody gets a majority, the last place drops out. And anybody who had voted for that last place candidate as won would then have their second choice counted, right? And you go down until somebody gets a majority. But it's interesting you bring that up because there is a lot of discussion within the reform community itself is how do you ensure the best process for counting votes that truly reflect the will of the voter. So we could go on a whole nother hour about all the wonky conversations of the conducere method, ranked pairs. And there is a group in Oregon that's gotten very far on what's called score voting, which does what you say. You get more points if you're ranked first, second, third. So those are all things that, in my view, I have no idea. I have no idea what's the absolute best. The basis I try to use is this better than what we're currently using? And if so, let's advance it and then also advance the conversation. So, that's kind of where we are today. There's going to be a lot of discussions over the next year. But,
so I think the score voting is, to me, the most appealing because if you say we had 4 candidates like Scott, you said Scott Sherman, Tasha, Barbara, and Todd Gloria, right? Mm-hmm. And if I voted for Barbara first and Todd Gloria second and so on and so forth, she gets 4 points, he gets 3 points, 2 points, 1 point, but you might have it in a different order. So you, as a candidate, have to appeal to as many people as possible. Even if you're not their first choice, you might be their second, and that's still worth a chunk of points.
Yeah, that's the same. I mean, that's the same. That is the argument for ranked choice voting is one of the things is saying one of the points the organizations, it's called More Choice San Diego. One of the group made was that when I remember I talked about incentives, right? That the current election system incentivizes candidates and representatives to appeal to a certain segment of voters is that ranked choice voting, whether it's done with score or whether it's done with a methodology that drops off the last, it incentivizes candidates to talk to voters who may not even vote for them first because those second, third place votes are still important and could very likely decide who is the ultimate winner.
Yeah. I just think about how great it would be to have a situation like on the presidential stage where we have 4 candidates and hey, these people aren't, I mean, the candidates are really, where are they targeting? Pennsylvania, Florida, Michigan, there's like 3 or 4 states that they need to win, and then everything else is kind of decided. So if we had something like this where you had to appeal to the broader people, we would feel like we're represented a little bit better, and granted, we're far ways away from that, but that's something we can achieve within our lifetime. I think. I don't think it's that far fetched. And I think that with the way things are right now, I believe that there's possible like major reform on the federal level because to see people like we live in America and to see people having to wait 12 hours to vote or all the other issues you hear, it's insane to me. It doesn't make sense. Taking people off the roll because they moved, like I saw somewhere in, I don't know if this is, maybe I just don't know enough about this, but somewhere in Canada, someone was saying that I moved like 3 times and they just updated the voter roll every time. And so you just went to your local place. You don't have to do anything special on your own. They just kind of do it for you. So obviously there's going to be some argument against it, but it's just, it's crazy to me that it's not a better system or it's not an easier system. And it makes a lot more sense when you know, or when you understand that they don't really have an incentive to make it a better system, right?
That's right. The incentives of, those that get elected get elected under the system that exists, right? And why would you change a system that you don't know if you can win?
Yeah.
But I also have the optimism. The term progressive has its own meaning today, but the great progressive era, where the term is usually alluding to, that was actually an era at the turn of the century focused on reform. And that's the reason why we have primary elections conducted by the state rather than in the back room of the smoke-filled room of the party bosses. I'm bringing that up because it took a long time to get there, but once it did, it happened almost overnight. Almost every state adopted them, right? And so, the optimism I see is that there's this growing momentum, awareness, interest in discussion. I don't know what the perfect solution is, and I think it might be different in Kansas than it is in California. Every state has its own voter experience. Some states you've never registered by a party, for example. It needs to be taken a state at a time, but there is that general voter sentiment. There's the group of folks working on these issues that are developing the relationships and the partnerships that we're getting close to a point that I don't know whether it's next year or 10 years, right? That some significant reforms will get pushed through in large enough states that, it'll get the ball rolling, and then once it gets rolling, it will go very fast.
Possible ripple effect, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Well, I hope so. What about any of the local or any measures, any like B or E? Do you want to talk about any of those?
Well, Measure B is the Independent Police Review Commission. I think it's going to pass pretty easily. Most simply, that's going to create a citizens oversight committee, essentially. So if somebody has a issue that they felt they were treated unfairly by the police department, rather than going to the political powers that be, or the city attorney or the district attorney, which I think a lot of people think have spent a lot of time protecting maybe the police. There's a citizens oversight body they can take it to. It's independent from the political system. And hopefully that helps build a better relationship and more trust between, especially the communities that feel like they're mistreated by the police and the police officers themselves. So I think it's going to pass relatively easily. Interestingly, this idea is not new. It was brought several years ago, 3-4 years ago, I think the first time, and it got shut down in committee because it was not a politically popular thing to support. Obviously, we all know with this election year, the issues that have come to the forefront, and it passed unanimously to be placed on the ballot, and I would expect it to have substantial support to pass.
Real quick on that one, do you know the Citizens Committee, what kind of power they're going to have? Are they going to be able to, I would doubt that they'll be able to fire people, but they might make recommendations, or do you know?
I don't know exactly. I know they'll be able to look into matters and do some kind of investigation detail. I don't know whether they're going to have advisory opinions or how exactly it happens. Maybe I should know that, but I'm
curious. Because I have a feeling that the police are going to say this is going to slow them down. It's going to make work harder. They're going to be less efficient. Does this replace internal affairs division? I'd imagine it wouldn't. Are they going to work in conjunction with the police? Like that to me is an interesting one. And maybe I should hopefully I can find someone from the local police that might be able to answer this, or maybe the bill sponsor, but that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, to be determined, I guess. What about E? Do you know?
Measure E is an interesting one. That would raise the height limit down in the Midway district. Voters passed an initiative years ago that limited, basically how high you could build and preserving access to the ocean and trying to not create high density there in the Midway district where the sports arena is now. So some interesting, without commenting on the initiative itself, some interesting dynamics is that some of you may have been following that they asked for RFPs to actually build in the Midway district. So there were two competing proposals and one was selected. So Measure E has to pass for this development to get built. And so if Measure E passes, it clears the way for this development. Also future developments in that area. I think those who live around the area, in Ocean Beach and Pacific and in Ocean Beach and Point Loma in particularly, I think are pretty, by and large, not very happy about it. But it's a decision that's made by the entire city, not the people that live right around the Midway district. So I think that's going to be a very competitive one. And it's an interesting issue because it was literally the voters who said, here's the height limit we want. The argument is that was made several decades ago. And so it's time for the voters to revisit it.
So I think this is an interesting one. I don't believe this would have passed if the Chargers were still here. I don't even think we get this far, in my opinion. I think people are looking, they see that the Sockers, did the Sockers play there?
I think they still play there, right? Yeah, I went to a game last year.
The Sockers, the goals, like some of our other stuff, we have concerts that go on there. And the argument about the traffic is a huge concern because going to like a goals game, which is minor league hockey, it's insane, the traffic afterwards, and trying to get through, trying to get out, trying to get an Uber. It's just not a very well-run system, well-built system. And I guess the argument would be that they would improve infrastructure. This would bring a lot of jobs. It would improve the area. People who live in that area definitely don't want it to be, don't want the headache that would come with it too. But now that I think it's interesting, we have this simultaneous construction of Qualcomm, and now they're trying to make this into a major venue as well. And ultimately, people would say that it helps San Diego for more concerts, more events, and revitalizes that district. I'm worried about the traffic. The traffic's getting terrible in San Diego in general. So
I want to know what's going to happen with the swap meet.
Yeah, well, I mean, that will obviously move probably somewhere else too. Maybe it'll go to Qualcomm parking lot. Well, actually, that's all dug up too.
Yeah.
Maybe it goes away. A lot of people rely on that swap meet too. So that's a great question. I don't know. Well, any last words, Chet? Not like any last words, but any closing remarks or anything? I know we're about 40 minutes now, and some people are on their lunch break, so we'll try and wrap up here.
No, I mean, if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Probably most people are ready for me to shut up by now, though.
I think, Chad, one of the things that, I'm glad you can come on and explain some of this stuff is that it's hard to listen to this on different news stations or read about it in the newspaper. It's good for just someone to explain it. Like ranked choice voting makes so much more sense when you just kind of talk about it for a couple of minutes. And I like the idea, that's for sure. I think that's one of the reforms that I'm definitely behind, as well as more options. Having 2 as opposed to 4 is not ideal, but again, the parties involved are probably not too keen on opening up the options there because it lessens their chance. But this is, I think we're moving towards something here in the political sphere where we need more inclusivity instead of excluding people. So I look at you as one of the people who are kind of pioneering that. In general, you're the only person I know who's doing that. So whenever I have a political question or an election question, I go directly to you. So I do appreciate you coming on and chatting with us about this. And if I have anyone send any questions, Justin at lawyerandbluejeans.com, send them my way and I'll pass them on to Chad or put you in touch or something like that. But maybe we'll try and get you on soon if we have some stuff passed, and we can talk about that too, as far as what it means and how it might affect us. Sound good?
Sure. Sounds good. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Chad. Appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Make sure if you're watching this on Facebook, like it, share it, whatever you have to do to trick the algorithm to move it to the top of your screen. Thank you, everyone. And we will probably have another webinar coming up next week. Be sure to check your emails for a notification of that. So thank you. Chad, we'll see you soon.
See you.
Bye.